A lot has happened in the last week in the Israel-Hamas war, whether it is in the hostage front, the ongoing fighting, or the International Court of Justice. Let's talk about some of the highlights. On May 23rd, the IDF recovered the bodies of 3 more hostages from the Gaza Strip. The 3, Orion Hernandez, Michel Nisbaum, and Hanan Yevlunka, were recovered from a tunnel in Jabalia refugee camp in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The IDF then stated that, like the bodies that were retrieved last week, intelligence information that the military has suggests that the 3 were killed already on October 7th, and their bodies were kidnapped back to the Gaza Strip. Information leading to the finding of the tunnel where they were located was gleaned last week from ongoing IDF investigations from what is happening inside the Gaza Strip, specifically from interrogation of Palestinians that have been arrested. The 3 were not among the hostages whom the IDF has already publicly confirmed their death. However, they are likely among those additional 20 to 25 hostages that different reports have suggested that both Israel and the United States intelligence believe are dead. In other words, they are not part of the official numbers that the IDF has stated are dead hostages. However, they are likely part of the unofficial numbers that the intelligence estimates are also already dead. With that, the number of hostages remaining in the Gaza Strip is now 125, of whom 39 are confirmed dead by the IDF. In other news related to the hostage situation, after weeks of complete stalemate, there now appears to be first attempts to restart the hostage negotiations. On May 24th, it was reported that a high-level meeting between the head of the Israeli Mossad, Dedi Barnea, CIA Director William Barnes, and the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Athani has been arranged in order to probe restarting the talks. Among others, this signals an attempt to reincorporate Qatar back into the negotiations. After Egypt took the lead in the last round of negotiations that were unsuccessful, there are unconfirmed reports that there's a lot of anger within Israel over the fact that Egypt seemingly changed the terms of the deal that it agreed upon with Israel and then presented it to Hamas. That led to Hamas saying they agree and Israel saying they disagree. With that, it is also noteworthy that Egypt has not been invited to this first probing meeting, but instead the weight appears to be reshifting back to Qatar. In other highlights, and again this is only a very brief summary, the IDF operations both in Jabalia refugee camp and in Rafah are continuing in the last weeks, with reports of IDF tanks advancing further into the heart of Rafah. According to some estimates, over 800,000 Palestinians have already evacuated the region, heading to other parts in the Gaza Strip. Among others, the volume of Palestinians that are evacuating, even though the IDF has only declared certain parts of the areas of Rafah as areas that Palestinians need to evacuate, is leading to substantial overcrowding in the various different areas that Palestinians are being diverted to, both in Han Yunis and in the Al-Muasi refugee camp, as well as in Deir el-Balah. In addition to that, there were 2 big assassinations, and one of them was an assassination attempt that occurred in the Gaza Strip in the last week. On May 23rd, Dia ad-Din Asharfa, Hamas's deputy commander of national security, was assassinated in central Gaza. Among others, Asharfa was in charge of border security for Hamas and was the orchestrator of preventing Palestinian civilians from evacuating different zones that the IDF declared were closed. This is something that the IDF has been stating is happening since the war began, that it would order Palestinian civilians to evacuate from a certain area, but Hamas security would not necessarily allow that. In addition, what may turn out to be an even larger assassination, on May 24th there was a major attack that occurred in Rafah, with reports emerging that the target was Muhammad Shabana, Hamas's Rafah division commander. There's no confirmation if the assassination attempt was successful. However, if it is successful, it is going to be one of the largest assassinations of the Al-Qassam brigades that has occurred in terms of the commanders, and specifically will be a major blow to Hamas, leading up to more and more battles that go on in Rafah. In addition to this, there's also ongoing escalations between the IDF and Hezbollah in the northern parts of Israel, continuing from the last week. Other news, the Rafah crossing remains closed despite the IDF's attempts to negotiate its opening with Egypt. Egypt has stated that it will only accept Palestinian-agreed control over the Gazan side of the border. This, alongside the ongoing offensive in Rafah, has now contributed to a substantial decrease in the entrance of aid trucks into the Gaza Strip, which has now begun to slowly rise again as aid trucks are coming in from other crossings. However, it is still less than the numbers that were increasing in the last weeks. While Egypt has also not been allowing trucks to go from the Rafah crossing and travel towards the Kerem Shalom crossing and enter Gaza in a different way, the country did agree to this. It was reported only moments before I recorded this, after a conversation between U.S. President Biden and the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Other news on the international front. On May 24th, the International Court of Justice gave its ruling on the injunction South Africa had requested to be leveled against Israel. South Africa appealed to the court, stating that the IDF invasion of Rafah is a critical development in the war, and that in light of these new conditions, the country requested the court instruct Israel to stop the war entirely. In its ruling, the court largely accepted South Africa's reasoning that the invasion of Rafah, and specifically the volume of civilians that are affected by the invasion, constitutes a serious escalation. So with that, the court already is accepting that it is not just going to say, well, we've already ruled on the invasion of Gaza, but accepting this is now a new phase of the war. After detailing the different concerns, and after repeating the call for immediate unconditional release of all hostages held in Gaza, the court issued a series of injunctions to Israel. These include, and I quote, immediately halt its military offensive and any other actions in the Rafah government which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. In addition, Israel is ordered to maintain the opening of the Rafah crossing. It is also ordered to, again I quote, take effective measures to ensure the unimpeded access to the Gaza Strip of any commissions of inquiry, fact-finding missions, or other investigative bodies mandated by competent organs of the United Nations to investigate allegations of genocide. In addition, Israel is also required to submit a report within a month to the court on how it is implementing these injunctions. While the major order is, of course, to halt the military offensive in Rafah, it has already been suggested that the wording of the ruling could be read in different ways. The ruling specifically says that Israel is to stop offenses that may inflict harm and bring about the physical destruction of Palestinians. On the one hand, this is a more expansive interpretation because the court is instructing Israel not only to avoid killing Palestinian civilians, but creating life conditions that could bring about their destruction. That relates to the fact that Palestinians are being evacuated, or are evacuating in some cases, from Rafah, but the actual centers they're supposed to evacuate to are not ready for them. That means you're creating life conditions that could bring about the destruction of the group. On the other hand, it has also been suggested that the wording does not state that Israel is to halt its military operations in Rafah, full end of story, but instead that Israel is to do so in those cases that it is bringing about the physical destruction or creating the life conditions of the destruction of Palestinian civilians. In Israel, many government sources stated that the operation in Rafah will continue regardless. In fact, the major attack attempting to assassinate Mohammed Shabana was done moments after the ICJ ruling was published. At the same time, official government interpretations thus far have responded by trying to adopt this minimalist interpretation of the ruling, stating, among others, and I quote, Israel has not and will not operate military in Rafah in ways that bring about the partial or total destruction of Palestinian civilian population. Israel will continue its efforts to allow humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip and act, according to the law, to take all efforts to reduce the damage to civilian population in Gaza. The statement also added that Israel will continue to maintain the opening of the Rafah crossing. With that, it is apparent that the country is going to try to embrace a minimalistic interpretation of the ruling, not just say it's not listening to it, but actually say, no, actually the country is following it already, which will likely influence its military operation in Rafah somewhat, but not bring it to a complete stop. In addition, it is also important that the instruction to allow commissions of inquiry of the UN to enter into the Gaza Strip is also critically important. This can also be interpreted in different ways. However, up until now, Israel has not allowed any such commissions to enter. If they would be now compelled to allow commissions of inquiry to enter into the Gaza Strip, this may contribute to other injunctions that will be filed to the court, which may eventually lead the court to compel Israel to stop the war. Remains to be seen how this develops. Right now, what's important to note with regards to the ICJ is that if Israel is seen to not comply with the ruling of the court, this is then transmitted to the UN Security Council that is supposed to act to enforce the court ruling, which in fact would mean leveling sanctions against Israel. Typically, Israel would rely on the US veto to stop those sanctions. However, the United States is in a bit of a bind, since the United States has also been calling upon Israel to stop its offensive in Rafah, and has gone as far as to say it is a mistake and is not necessary. So now the United States would be in a bit of a bind, saying if this is submitted to the UN Security Council, that Israel is not complying with a court instruction to, in the more expansive interpretation, halt its military offensive in Rafah, the United States would have a hard time defending Israel internationally and saying it should be allowed to continue when the United States itself has said this is a mistake. Again, those are just some of the main highlights from the last week. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and an Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at the University of California, Irvine. For my regular viewers, I am still traveling. I am sorry that there have not been more regular updates. I will hopefully start uploading them again sometime towards the middle or end of next week. If you have any questions or comments, do feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.